Welcome to the drugs episode of Small Battalion, or Volksdröge, which is German for the people's drug. This episode, we're going to explore drugs in the Third Reich. I know. Did you even imagine that this existed? I didn't. So here's how it all came to be. I'm getting high, coincidentally, with my friend Naomi and her roommate Janine. And somehow we ended up in the Third Reich. And because, truthfully, I often end up in the Third Reich. All right. So there we are chatting. And Janine says that meth was discovered in German laboratories just before World War II. It was actually Nazi policy to have soldiers on meth. And this is how they conquered France. This book, Blitzed, talks about this story. And it's blowing my fucking mind. So let's get into it. So Blitzed is written by Norman Ohler.
Blitzed is being intoxicated, being fucked up, being out of your mind. Blitz is being blitzed. The book Blitzed is the first full account on how drugs were used and especially abused in Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945. I think historians have been afraid to touch it because if you talk about Nazis and Nazi failures and Nazi successes, you talk about ideology, you talk about the cult of Hitler. You try to find very meaningful reasons for what happened, explanations. I think historians just are not familiar with drugs. They don't know what it means. They don't know how to evaluate it. We don't look really at how drugs shape history. Our historians just don't do that. They don't do that yet. I think Blitzed will change that. It's quite funny how it started because I was approached by a good friend of mine, an underground DJ in Berlin, and he said the Nazis took loads of drugs. And I said, that's a perfect topic for my new novel. But then after a few days, I thought, is it really true? Because somehow I believed it. Intuitively, I thought there might be something to it. So I went down into the archives, to the federal archives in Germany, to the military archives in Germany, and I went to Washington, D.C., to the National Archives of the United States, and I found tons of documents relating to drugs in Nazi Germany. And at that moment, I knew that there was a nonfiction book that needs to be written and that has not been written yet. And then the book slowly came together.
In his introduction, he states, National Socialism was toxic, in the truest sense of the word. It gave the world a chemical legacy that still affects us today. A poison that refuses to disappear. On the one hand, the Nazis presented themselves as clean-cut and enforced a strict, ideologically underpinned anti-drug policy with propagandist pomp and draconian punishments. On the other hand, a particularly potent and perfidious substance became a popular product under Hitler. This drug carved out a great career for itself all over Europe. Under the trademark Pervitin, this little pill became the accepted Volksdröge, or people's drug, and was on sale in every pharmacy. It wasn't until 1939 that its use was restricted by making Pervitin prescription only. And the pill was not subjected to regulation until the Reich Opium Law of 1941. So this book was published in 2018. And at the time, there were over 100 million meth users around the planet. Ohler says it's our most popular poison. And he's right. Today, it's known as crystal meth and is ingested nasally in high doses. An upper with a dangerously high kick. It's used as a party drug for boosting performance in the workplace, offices, parliaments, and universities. It curbs sleep and appetite while promoting euphoria. And Hitler needed this shit to win the war. So where was this drug discovered? In the Temmler factory, on the edge of Berlin, in what is now known as Germany's Technology Park. Albert Mendel, the Jewish co-owner of the Tempelhof chemical factory, was expropriated by racist laws of the regime, and Temmler took over his share, growing the business exponentially. Quote, this was a boom period for the German chemical industry, or at least for its Aryan members. Research was tirelessly conducted on pioneering new substances that would ease the pain of modern humanity or sedate its troubles. Many of the pharmacological innovations of the time shaped the way we consume medicine today. Thank you, Nazis, for yet another major fuck up. The Temmler factory today is now in ruins, abandoned, but it was the former drug lab of the Third Reich. I love that. And the mastermind behind this drug was Dr. Fritz Hauschild, head of pharmacology at Temmler from 1937 to 1941, who was in search of a new type of medicine, a performance-enhancing drug. I love this quote. It was here that the methamphetamine was produced of a quality that even Walter White, the drug cook of the TV series Breaking Bad, could only have dreamed of. Because methamphetamine in its pure form is less harmful than the crystal meth produced in labs where it's mixed with poisons such as gasoline, battery acid, or antifreeze. I mean, those things seem to be the common mixtures. You know, it's like, what happens? Somebody's like, hey, I got leftover antifreeze, put it in some crystal meth. We'll rock some tits tonight. John Wolfgang von Goethe said, voluntary dependence is the finest state. So, according to Oehler, in order to understand meth and other substances in the Nazi state, we must go back before the beginning of the Third Reich. The development of modern societies is bound tightly with the creation and distribution of drugs as the economy is with advances in technology. In 1805, Goethe wrote Faust in classicist Weimar and perfected his thesis that the genesis of man is itself drug-induced. I changed my brain, therefore I am. I mean, I've changed my brain lots of times. And, you know, I've not done major drugs, okay? Weed, totals, tried cocaine a handful of times, mostly because of a bunch of circus carnies, and mushrooms. One time it was pleasurable, another time it wasn't. But like, you know, meth ain't gonna go down this hatch, I'll tell you that. So, pharmaceutical assistant Friedrich Wilhelm Sertner performed experiments with opium poppies whose thickened sap anesthetized pain more effectively than anything else. But sometimes this bitter sap doesn't ease pain quite strongly enough, and at other times it can lead to unintended overdose and fatal poisoning. Then Sturtner made an astonishing discovery. Woo! He was able to isolate morphine, the crucial alkaloid in opium, a kind of pharmacological Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles? A kind of pharmacological Mephistopheles. No, a kind of pharmacological Mephistopheles. I did it. I said it. There you go. See, the devil ties up your tongue. That magic's pain away. One of the most important pharmacological events in the history of humankind. Pain could now be assuaged, removed in precise doses. Before this, apothecaries all over Europe had, to the best of their ability and their consciences, pressed pills from ingredients of their own herb gardens or from the deliveries of women who foraged in hedgerows. Now, in just a short time, these homegrown chemists became a big business. Then, when injections were invented in 1850, there was no stopping the victory parade of morphine. The painkiller was used in the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War. The pain of even seriously injured soldiers could now be kept within bounds, says Oehler. This made a different scale of war possible. Fighters who before would have been ruled out for a long time by an injury were soon coddled back to health and thrust into the front line again. I mean, I never thought of it this way, right? But this makes sense. How can you conduct a war more sophisticated technologically and the people that are fighting it are still, you know, at a certain pain threshold? They can't. They need help. Morphine took the world by storm. From Europe via Asia all the way to America. In drugstores across the U.S., 2 active ingredients were available without prescription. Fluids containing morphine to calm people down, while drinks containing cocaine, i.e. Coca-Cola. I'm sure a lot of people know this, but Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. I guess at the turn of the century, you know what? Everyone was nervous, and the cabal was like, yo, man, we gotta fucking sedate these motherfuckers. So here we are. Felix Hoffmann, a chemist at Bayer, synthesized acetylsalicylic acid from willow bark. It went on sale as aspirin and conquered the globe. 11 days later, Hoffmann invented diacetylmorphine, a derivative of morphine. The first designer drug, trademarked as heroin, and entered the market and began its own campaign. Maybe you've noticed how I pronounce morphine. I feel like it gives it more of a character. Like morphine is just this angry temptress, seducing you. And you're like, morphine, get away from me. Heroin is a fine business, the directors of Bayer said, and advertised it as a remedy for headaches, general indisposition, cough syrup for children, and for colic babies. Where the chemical industry was concerned, Germany was the workshop of the world. Made in Germany became a guarantee of quality, especially for drugs. Then World War I happened, and where France and Great Britain were able to acquire natural stimulants such as coffee, tea, vanilla, and pepper, and other natural medicines from the colonies overseas, Germany couldn't because they'd lost their sparse colonial possessions under the terms of the Versailles Treaty. I mean, that would make me fucking pissed. And so they had to find other ways, and stimulants had to be produced synthetically. In fact, Germany was in dire need of artificial assistance. The war had inflicted such deep wounds and caused the nation both physical and psychic pain. In the 1920s, drugs became more and more important for the despondent population. The desire for sedation was huge, and Germany became the global leader. Many of the chemical substances that we know today were developed and patented within a very short time. Not only did German companies produce the most medicines, they also provided the lion's share of chemical raw materials for their manufacture around the world. A new economy was formed, and the picturesque Rhine Valley became a chemical valley of sorts. Small outfits grew into major corporations because this is what Oler says. You don't need much capital to start a lab. You don't need that much space. You need a couple of fucking beakers and you got yourself a business. In 1925, the bigger chemical factories joined together to form IG Farben, who eventually produced Zyklon B, which was the chemical that was used to exterminate the Jews. By 1926, Germany was the top producer of morphine and, quote, world champion when it came to exporting heroin. I mean, I'm digging this history. Germans were also leaders in the global cocaine trade. Pharma companies like Merck, Boehringer, and Knoll controlled 80% of the global cocaine market. Peru sold its entire annual production of cocaine, over 5 tons, almost exclusively to Germany. The young Weimar Republic, swimming in consciousness-altering and intoxicating substances, delivered heroin and cocaine to the 4 corners of the world and rose to become a global dealer. I mean, who would have pegged the Germans to be drug dealers? Like, in that way, you know what I mean? They just seem so like it wouldn't be them. But turns out whoever it doesn't seem to be, it is. Then the onset of the chemical 20s, as Oler frames it. And you get a drugged out, whored out population, unable to grapple with the defeat of World War I, and instead becoming what author Alfred Dublin termed the whore of Babylon. That's my fave. Berlin nightlife, oh boy, he said. The world has never seen anything like it. We used to have a great army, and now we've got perversities, said author Klaus Mann. I mean, is this where the name Pervitin came from? Perv? I don't know. I've yet to get to that chapter because this is part 1 of a multi-part series on drugs in the Third Reich. This whole thing was fictionalized in the Netflix series Babylon Berlin. Okay, it followed this police inspector addicted to morphine because of his PTSD from World War I. You gotta watch it. It's so fucking good. Okay, we talked about the campaign against Germany during World War I. That was created by Edward Bernays. Remember this? And it really demonized the Hun. It demonized the German. And this really cut to their core. So the country was in a moral shambles. Okay? So everything seemed permitted, right? In the 20s. And the metropolis mutated into the experimental capital of Europe. Police couldn't keep up, and collapse happened quickly. The following lyrics of a song depicted what it was like. Once, not so very long ago, sweet alcohol, that beast, brought warmth and sweetness to our lives, but then the price increased. And so cocaine and morphine, Berliners now select, let lightning flashes rage outside, we snort and we inject. At dinner in the restaurant, the waiter brings the tin, or coke for us to feast upon, forget whiskey and gin. Let drowsy morphine take its subcutaneous effect upon our nervous system, we snort and we inject. These medications aren't allowed, of course they're quite forbidden, but even such illicit treats are very seldom hidden. Euphoria awaits us, and though, as we suspect, our foes can't wait to shoot us down, we snort and we inject. And if we snort ourselves to death or into the asylum, our days are going downhill fast. How better to beguile them? Europe's a madhouse anyway, no need for genuflecting. The only way to paradise is snorting and injecting. Whoa. So morphine and heroin were sold illegally over the counter and symbolized the extravagance of the age. Both the communists and the Nazis, who were fighting for power in the streets, viewed it as degenerative. Okay, they did not like it. The Nazis believed they could heal the people through ideological inebriation in the form of the swastika. According to the Nazis, the Germans had to be brought to states of euphoric enthusiasm or hysteria through populist arguments and torch parades, flag consecrations, rapturous announcements, and public speeches aimed at achieving a collective ecstasy. Now let's look at the speech of Hitler and tell me that you're not aroused or hysterical.
Wir sind doch wieder ein so anständiges Volk geworden. Wir sind doch jetzt wieder ein so fleißiges und tatkräftiges Volk geworden. Was schaffen wir jetzt nicht wieder in Deutschland? Was haben wir nicht für Aufgaben? Man hat uns die ganzen Jahre schon eingeredet, dass der Deutsche sowieso nicht ganz gleichwürdig sei den anderen Völkern in der Welt. Was haben wir heute für Aufgaben? Was für gewaltige Werke bauen wir? Wir bauen heute die schönsten Straßen, gewaltige Anlagen, industrielle Art, neue Erfindungen haben wir gemacht, ungeheure Wohnhauskolonien, sie werden entstehen und sind bereits entstanden. Was wird nicht überall gearbeitet auf allen Gebieten? Wir haben bewiesen in diesen 3 Jahren, dass wir ein Volk sind, das bestehen kann vor den anderen. Und darum bitte ich dich nun, deutsches Volk, darüber gib nun dein Urteil ab. Der Welt unterstelle ich mich nicht, die kann mich nicht richten.
If the Weimar Republic can be seen in psychohistorical terms as a repressed society, its supposed antagonists, the National Socialists, were at the head of that trend. They hated drugs because they wanted to be the drug themselves. Now let's take a look at the Fuhrer and the image that was portrayed versus the life that was lived. So the image of Hitler during the Weimar period, which is the German state between 1918 and 1933, was of a man tirelessly working, putting his life completely at the service of his people. That he was entirely devoted to the Herculean task of gaining control of Germany's social contradictions and problems, and to ironing out the negative consequences of the lost World War. One of his closest allies said of him in 1930, "He is all genius and body, and he mortifies that body in a way that would shock people like us. He doesn't drink. He practically only eats vegetables and doesn't touch women. So this guy is a celibate vegan?" The myth of Hitler as an anti-drug teetotaler who made his own needs secondary was an essential part of the Nazi methodology, says Ohler, and was presented again and again by mass media. Think of this, folks. The mass media. Everything that you are seeing now in the media is actually the opposite of what really is. So we'll all see this soon, but this is what's really going on. So following their seizure of power in 1933, the Nazis suffocated the eccentric, pleasure-seeking culture of the Weimar Republic. Drugs were taboo. Seductive poisons had no place in a system in which only the Fuhrer was supposed to be doing the seducing. This sounds like a sexual takeover to me. The path taken by the authorities in their so-called war on drugs lay less in an intensification of the opium laws than in the idea of racial hygiene. The term droge, which I guess sounds more Swedish, which at one point meant nothing more than dried plant parts, was assigned negative connotation by the Nazis. Drug consumption was stigmatized and quickly criminalized. In 1933, a new law was passed where addicts were imprisoned for up to 2 years. Further, measures ensured that doctors who consumed drugs would be forbidden to work for up to 5 years. Doctors were required to file a drug report whenever someone was prescribed narcotics for more than 3 weeks, because public security, according to them, was being endangered. Every German was also obligated to report any drug-addicted family or friends so that action could be taken immediately. And a filing system was put in place. This was meant to create a surveillance state. In the autumn of 1935, a new martial health law was put in place that forbade marriage if one of the parties suffered from a mental disturbance. Narcotics addicts were marginalized into this category and branded as psychopathic personalities and were sterilized. Furthermore, under the guise of euthanasia, those considered criminally insane would be murdered in the first years of war. The anti-drug policy served as a vehicle for the exclusion and suppression, even the destruction of the marginal groups and minorities. According to the Medical Journal of Lower Saxony in 1939, the Jew has used the most refined means to poison the mind and the soul of German people, and to guide thought along an un-German path, which inevitably led to doom. Removing this Jewish infection, which could lead to a national disease and to the death of the people, is also a duty of our health leadership. So the extermination of the Jews was intrinsically tied with health policy. This is so frightening. From the outset, the racist terminology of National Socialism was informed by linguistic images of infection and poison, by the topos of toxicity. Jews were equated with bacilli or pathogens. They were described as foreign bodies and said to be poisoning the Reich, making the healthy social organism ill. So they had to be eradicated or exterminated. Hitler said there is no longer any compromise because such a thing would be to poison us. The poison, according to Oehler, lay in the language which dehumanized the Jew as a preliminary stage to their subsequent murder. The Nuremberg race laws of 1935 and the introduction of anapas, which was proof of Aryan ancestry, manifested the demand for purity of blood. It was seen as one of the supreme goods of the people and it needed to be protected. So this was the point of intersection between anti-Semitic propaganda and anti-drug policy. It was not the dose that determined the poison, but the category of foreignness. Jews and drugs merged into a single toxic or epidemiological unit that menaced Germany. The Nazi Party's Office of Racial Policy claimed that the Jewish character was essentially drug dependent and played a central role in the global drug trade. Now let's take a side shift to Dr. Theodor Morell, aka Hitler's personal physician. So one night in 1933, the word Jew was smeared on the plaque of Dr. Theodor Morell outside of his office. He reacted in a way that was typical at the time, and he became a member of the Nazi Party. He's like, yo, I'm not Jewish, even though my skin is dark. Let me rectify. So he joins the Nazi Party. And his practice quickly becomes one of the most successful in Berlin, mainly because he had really advanced technology that was purchased by his wife Hanny's fortune. One of the areas that he was expert in was the injection of vitamins. That was Morell's strategy for keeping his patients interested. If vitamins weren't enough, he had stimulants to the injection. For men, it could be testosterone for muscle building and potency. For women, extracts of nightshade as an energy supplement and for hypnotically blue eyes. If a troubled actress came to him, he would give her an injection to calm her nerves before she stepped on stage. His reputation went beyond the city, and in 1936, he gets a call from the Brown House Party headquarters in Munich, or München. München? The official Reich photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, had a sexually transmitted disease, and they needed Morell to be discreet about it. And Morell was also an expert in STDs. So they have a plane ready for him. They fly him over to Munich, and the rest, you could say, is history. He gets rid of Hoffman's clap, and everything is tickety-boo. Now, that's a term I haven't heard lately, tickety-boo. And it kind of, anybody who used to say it before tickety-boo, it would annoy the fuck out of me. But right now, you know what? I'm reviving and introducing new words and old terms. So the Hoffmans are so happy, no more gonorrhea, and they invite Morell and his wife Hanny to their house for dinner. And guess who was there? Adolfo Hitler, as he often was. Because Hoffmann, as I said, was Hitler's photographer. Hoffmann owned the copyright of a lot of photos of Hitler, and he published books, one of them called Hitler as No One Knows Him. They were also connected through Eva Braun, who was Hoffmann's assistant. So anyways, they're at the dinner. Apparently, Morell sweats profusely, right? As Oehler talks about in the book. And, he doesn't talk much during dinner. The only thing he can talk about are his injections, okay? So then Hitler goes on that he's got like these intestinal problems. And Morel says, well, you know what? I think I got a treatment that might be helpful. So Hitler invites Morel to his mountain retreat. And while he's there, he admits to Morel that his health was so poor that he could barely perform any action. I mean, look, I think about this. I'm like, if you're Hitler and you got all this business to do, all this exterminating, all this invading, right? I mean, wouldn't your body would get sore? Hitler tells Morel, look, I've gotten some bad treatment from doctors, okay, who would starve him. That would be the treatment. And he's like, this is fucked. So there'd be a big dinner. And Hitler, I guess, would eat like a pig. And then he would suffer from unspeakable bloating and itchy eczema on both legs. So bad he had to wear bandages around his feet and couldn't wear boots. I mean, you can't be a dictator without boots. Am I wrong? I mean, you gotta have boots. You can't be a dictator in shoes. No one's gonna fucking take you seriously, okay? So I get this guy's dilemma. I was diagnosed with eczema in the last couple of years. Made me think, am I Hitler? Could I be Hitler? Or anyone who has eczema? Are they a Hitlerite? Are they Hitlerian? So Morel diagnoses Hitler with abnormal bacterial flora causing poor digestion, which sounds pretty bang on to me. Because you know what? I've also had bloating too. I mean, I don't want to say, but I've suffered the same symptoms that Hitler has suffered. This is freaking me out just a tad, Morel prescribes this concoction called Mutaflor, which was developed by a doctor and bacteriologist, and he was cured. And Hitler was over the fucking moon, and he appoints Morel as his personal physician, okay? When he tells his wife, Hanny, she's not happy about it, because she's like, I'm never going to see you. And I mean, also, who wants to be the personal physician of a dictator? That might be a tough thing to get out of. The story goes that Hitler hated people touching him and refused treatment from other doctors if they inquired too invasively into the causes of his ailments. He's like, yo, man, don't ask too many questions. But Morel, okay, with his cozy, harmless air, gave Hitler a sense of security. And he had no intention of questioning Hitler to find the root of his health problems. Instead, he injects him over and over and over again. The penetration of the needle, according to Oehler, was enough. He'd prepare a 20% Merck glucose solution or vitamin injection. I don't like when people say vitamin. There are a few of them, but to me, it's vitamin. I don't know. Are we going to have a fight about it? Immediate removal of the symptoms was Morel's motto that he administered not only in the Bohemian circles in Berlin, but also to Patient A, as Hitler appeared in Morel's books. I mean, maybe Patient A because Adolf, or Patient A because if you got an alphabet for the Germans in the 1930s, first part of the alphabet is going to be the hits. So Hitler was jazzed at the speed with which his condition improved. He's like, yo, I'm on fire, man. I'm going to light this planet on fire. Usually while the needle was still in his vein. Morel's argument to Hitler was with all the tasks that he had to accomplish, right? He couldn't wait around for a pill to enter the bloodstream. Injection was the key. Oehler says, the busy ruler lived in constant fear of not being able to function properly, that he wouldn't be able to do everything he needed to do. Soon, Morel's unconventional method gained in importance, and Hitler was receiving several injections a day. And shortly after that, Hitler never left his side. And I don't know what poor Hanny was doing, okay? I mean, she had a fortune. Who knows? But if he could never leave Hitler's side, when did he see his wife? I don't know. Before every speech, Hitler would get shot up. Colds were ruled out and cured by these injections. And to be able to hold his arm for as long as possible when he was doing the Nazi salute, Hitler trained with chest expanders and snacked on glucose and vitamins. Okay? You imagine? The glucose administered gave the brain a blast of energy after 20 seconds, while the combined vitamins allowed Hitler to address his troops or the people wearing a thin brown shirt uniform, even on cold days, without showing signs of physical weakness. I mean, it sounds to me like he's the first American apparel model. The first years of Morel's treatment developed into an extremely successful period for Hitler. Shit was going down good for the Fuhrer, man. He had a problem, inject it. right? His intestinal cramps are gone. And because he's always dosed up on vitamins, he's healthy and agile, right? The Fuhrer is flexible, right? He's moving, he's doing, And the German economy was booming. One of the central pieces for the Nazi was independence from its neighbors. Germany had few natural raw materials, so synthetic ones had to be created. And when Dr. Fritz Hauschild synthesized methamphetamine, the Temmler factory patented the pill Pervitin. The Perv pill. So the molecular structure of this pioneering material is similar to adrenaline, as it easily passes through the blood and into the brain. I've been hearing a lot of talk about the blood-brain barrier lately. You probably have too, in reference to the vaccines. That, you can't, and a lot of shit, 5G technology, any environmental pollutions that there are, it's got to pass through that barrier well. And if it doesn't, you got problems. But meth doesn't have the same side effects as adrenaline, such as high blood pressure, and it lasts longer. So, it's much more reliable. The effect occurs because the drug tickles out the messenger substances, dopamine and non-adrenaline, from the nerve cells of the brain and pours them into synaptic gaps. This puts the brain into excited communication with itself, and a chain reaction occurs. A neuronal firework explodes, and a biochemical machine gun starts firing an uninterrupted sequence of thoughts, says Oler. All of a sudden, the consumer feels wide awake and experiences an increase in energy. The senses are intensified to the extreme. One feels livelier, energized to the tips of one's hair and fingers. Self-confidence goes through the roof, and a sense of euphoria and a feeling of lightness and freshness. I guess you don't need douche, right? Just take meth. You'll feel fresh. A state of emergency is experienced with meth. The effects are long-lasting, even more than 12 hours. The Temmler company saw a roaring trade and contacted one of the most successful PR agencies in Germany and launched an ad campaign, the likes of which had never been seen. It was marketed to housewives in chocolate to make them more happy, to be a better housewife. Reawakening joy in the despondent is one of the most valuable gifts this new medication can give to patients. Even frigidity in women can easily be influenced. Yeah, because she's taken Perv. One patient leaflet claimed that Pervitin could compensate withdrawal effects from cocaine, alcohol, and even opiates. It was sanctioned and became legal. And this was the drug that fueled the Second World War. A senior hospital doctor said at the time, "We live in an energy-intense time that demands higher performance and greater obligations from us than at any time before." It was meant to counteract inadequate performance and integrate, quote, shirkers, malingerers, defeatists, and whiners into the labor process, which was key. You don't go to war with a flimsy labor pool. Pharmacologist Felix Hafner suggested the prescription of Pervitin as a supreme commandment, as it amounted to the last effort on behalf of the whole, a kind of chemical order. So folks, this concludes part 1 of Volksdröge. In part 2, we're going to dive deep. We're going to look how Pervitin fueled the Blitzkrieg, how it was key and was military policy in Germany's plan to increase its Lebensraum, its living room. So, I've been Sandra Battaglini. Always be wary of dictators. Never stop fighting. Be real. Peace out.